Hello, good afternoon. My name is Heather McLeish. I'm a director with EY Japan, and on behalf of the BCCJ, I would like to welcome you to our very first webinar, and to our guests, who I'll introduce in a moment, who have bravely come out on this day to join me to talk about the leadership response to COVID-19, which has quickly become not only a health risk, but a financial risk. Governments and business leaders are desperately trying to protect families, protect communities, protect our workers, and best practices need to be shared. I don't think anybody has a perfect plan. I think we're all building our plans or testing plans that we've had. So today I am happy to be joined by Jonathan Spraggs, VP and Head of Intercontinental Pharma at GSK, as well as Jeremy Sampson, Managing Director of Robert Walters in Japan and Korea. And kindly, they have offered their time and energy to talk about their company's responses to this crisis. And hopefully we can all be able to learn what they're doing. Also, today's session is interactive. So there is both a comments and a Q&A area where you can connect, and please send us your questions. They'll be filtered through to me here, and I'll be happy to address them to the panel. So let's begin without further ado. We have a limited amount of time today. We're going to take about 45 minutes. So I would like to really kick off. Jonathan, we're going to start with you, just simply because you're closer than Jeremy is at the moment. Where is GSK today?
So at the moment in Japan, we are doing our best to operate as normally as we possibly can. So obviously, as a pharma company, people rely on our medicines to stay well. Doctors rely on being able to access us to get the right information to treat our patients. And as much as possible, we're trying to operate as normally as we can to ensure business as usual and patients can access the medicines. So our offices are on basically in a situation where they're not actually closed, but we're advising people to work from home as much as possible. One of the main factors around that is avoiding public transit during the rush time. So even if people do come to work, we ask them to avoid those busy times or find different ways to commute. So good time to cycle to work. You can avoid the wind today. And
that should help your overall health and well-being.
That's true.
Too.
Yeah, get out there in the sunshine, stay healthy. Yeah. Don't get hay fever like I have. So you have to be a bit careful with that. Roughly 10% or so are coming to the office, I would estimate. Okay. And the good thing is it's not the same 10% every time. So people coming in when they have to. Mm-hmm. And across the country, we obviously have a large number of medical reps who are visiting hospitals and all sorts of HCPs across the country. And of course, we are working with those people, and some of those institutions say, please don't visit, we're very busy. So of course we respect that. Mm-hmm. Where they want to see us, we make ourselves available, and we're finding ways to work differently in this situation, which we'll talk about a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. EY is in a very similar position. I think our office isn't officially closed, but we're mostly working from home, but the office is open. There's a lot of good points to allowing still a space for people to come in. But this sounds like your plan has been in place for a while and now is being tested. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is. So for many, many years, obviously because of the types of products we supply and because we have requirements to be immediately available for information, we have to make sure we have extremely thorough and solid plans in place. So across our business, we have for many years had business continuity plans, and we actually run test simulations of them. When it comes to broader working from home, obviously a huge amount of work goes into the technology that underpins that. I'm pleased to say that I think pretty much everything we do could be done remotely where technology is required. And also, actually, it's interesting, with the Olympics coming up, we'd been preparing for the last year and a half, and we actually ran a couple of simulations, one day, where we asked everybody to work from home for a day, and we did that a couple of times. And the idea was we'd do that during the Olympic period as well. I'm not sure we're going to use them now. I hope we do.
We do.
But certainly that aided our planning for this scenario. But I would say that when you do that scenario planning, nothing's perfect. Right? Yeah. You can never predict the exact crisis you're going to have.
Yeah.
So yes, there are some adjustments we need to make along the way, but we've got pretty solid plans in place, and so far it's working extremely well.
Oh, I'm delighted to hear that. I'm absolutely delighted to hear that. I mean, all of us, I think most of us had some plans in place. Again, the testing of them will refine them and hopefully make them better.
Sort of work in progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's move on to Jeremy and what Robert Walters. Now, where is Robert Walters today? And how maybe compare and contrast to where GSK is?
Sure.
Different company, different response, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think right now we've actually ended up in a very, very similar place. But we've come from a very different place to begin with, I must say. So right now, very similar. So we are remote working, and we're strongly encouraging all of our employees to work from home. It's not mandated. We have found a number of people just aren't physically able to work from home. They might not have the setup or the capability to do so, or just their work environment at home might not be conducive to it. So we are strongly encouraging work from home. One of the things that was the most important for us when we decided to make the decision was to ensure that we could provide seamless service to our clients and candidates. We didn't want any client or candidate to know or get the impression that we weren't working as per usual. And thankfully, I think we've been able to achieve that to a really large degree. But yeah, we are coming from a very different place. So our BCP, quite honestly, was probably a little bit outdated. We, as a company, we didn't have any current work from home initiatives or set up in place at all. So
none at all.
None at all, except for of course, case by case scenarios with working parents, working mothers, and things like that. But thankfully, we have the technology, which we've rolled out probably in the last 18 months or so. So everybody has full remote capabilities. But whilst it was in early stages of discussion in terms of remote working and smart working, we hadn't taken the plunge just yet. So we really took the plunge in a very short period of time. So it was, I think, February 25th when the government came out on the Tuesday and announced that they strongly recommended teleworking. For us, that was the trigger point. So from there, we decided the very next day we'd enforce or encourage remote working. And so from the following day, we had everybody working from home. And similar, we had probably about 10% of the office coming into the office. But I think what we were able to achieve is what would have probably taken 6 months of small-scale trials and workshops and discussion and debate. We're able to achieve it in probably about a week or so.
That's amazing. And you got to skip all of that discussion and debate.
Yeah, exactly.
That takes so much time.
Absolutely. So it's definitely by no means the finished product, and we're continuing to learn every single day. But we spent that first week really trying to refine it and fine-tune it and work out best practice. And now it's become the new norm. And I really struggle to see how we'll go back to the old way when we do eventually go back.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably too early to start talking about, returns to norm. Of course, I think we're all excited to return to norm as soon as humanly possible. But that's really fantastic and very, very different journeys, very different journeys. I think EY's journey is much more similar to GSK. We had these plans in place. The Olympics was an excellent catalyst and hopefully still is for that. But to be fair, I don't think we really, we didn't test it as much as we would have had this not come up. So I see a big silver lining for us.
I think it's realistic, and we've all been to those crisis management things. And I think I've even been to some with EY where we try to simulate a crisis and make it real. Everyone wants to be somewhere else, and no one really buys into it. Unfortunately, but when you need it, you really need it. And I think hopefully one thing that might come out of it is we'll take some of those exercises a bit more seriously.
It's true. I have to admit, I was one of those people who, during the fire drills, you're like, oh yeah, you're gonna do it.
You book a meeting offsite,
or doing a conference call at the same time. I'm never gonna do that again. I think.
Depends which floor you're on.
Definitely. The higher up, the more I'm gonna be paying attention. But amazing journeys. And Jeremy, I think your company really should be applauded for recognizing an issue and putting in place procedure. I mean, certainly with the infrastructure of technology already there, but recognizing a need and being able to implement it. So I guess the next natural question is from a leadership perspective, you say, great, this is what we're going to do. how did people react?
I guess from our side, I think the first reaction from most of our employees was relief. I think, obviously everyone could see the situation evolving, and we were starting to observe what was going on in the companies around us, in the market, and we wanted to make sure that we were on the front foot and one of the leaders in taking action on all of this. But we were watching the other major global corporations and wanted to make sure that once we saw other firms taking steps, that we were going to be right at the front of the pack also. And there were a lot of learnings throughout and I think one thing we found early on was that we were spending too much time over communicating on everything. So
really, in what
a lot of this, because we weren't set up for it initially, so much of probably the first few days was actually figuring out how to function, how to operate. But as I said earlier, I mean, within a week or two, it did become the norm. So. Yeah, it was really a lot of we were figuring out how to handle the situation. We were continuing business as usual, but we're also updating and trying to hammer out our BCP at the same time. So that created just additional sort of workload and complexity to the ongoing situation.
Yeah, and definitely a plan on the go. Quite literally. That's fantastic. So, I mean, GSK, you've obviously you've put these processes into place. You had these days where people could plan whether or not they take it seriously.
It's very true.
Yeah, but you had it there. I mean, people should theoretically be aware. How was the reaction?
I think at a time like this, people actually look for some clear leadership and clear statements.
Absolutely.
Interestingly, when you make a decision like saying, I'm not going to close the office, I'm going to say it's not mandatory, but it's highly advised. Actually, that's an area for ambiguity. And you've got more comments saying, well, why don't you just say it's shut? Or why don't you say it's open? But actually, we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to provide some flexibility and options. But actually, sometimes in these stages, making a clear direction is easier for people to understand. And it's much easier in these times when certainly at the time we did this, the whole country was thinking about it. Now the whole world's thinking about it. But 3 weeks ago, the whole country. So it wasn't like we were trying to do something in isolation, which means you can behave a little bit differently to a regular change program or a regular transformation program. So you can be bolder, you can be clearer. Of course, you have to have empathy and understanding. It's interesting that you said over-communicating, because I think it's a really hard balance to strike. One thing we have done, so we first did it in Korea, because Korea is another one of the countries in my region, and it's like you, it's actually a few weeks further down the curve because of the size of the outbreak there. And we asked employees how they thought we were doing, what they'd like to hear, etc. We did a survey.
Yeah.
We've just done that in Japan. Again, got a survey back so that we could check and adjust. And it's really important to say, I'm changing this because we heard that, and really connect and show that you're still listening in these times. And that makes a big difference to how people accept it.
Oh, I think that makes a huge difference, especially that communication point. I think perhaps our guests watching might have a different idea, but I haven't heard too many people say oversharing has been a problem, far too much information, but not having a clear communication.
I'm starting to feel it now, actually. So I'm now London and America's woken up to this. I've now got 20 meetings put in my calendar for this week, all at night, of course, right? So my calendar looks free, but maybe I'm not going to sleep. But I think it's now starting to become a bigger challenge. Within Japan, it's not been quite so bad so far.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that too. As it starts to evolve around the world, other countries are now starting to look at Japan and Korea. What actions have we taken so that they can follow the lead of Japan?
Or they're they're suddenly interested in your plan that you put in place.
Right.
And I think, well, it's worked for a month, right?
Sure.
Now you're concerned.
And using that as the blueprint for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But on the communication piece you mentioned too, the other thing that I've found a challenge that we're working through is, there's so much meaning those short passing conversations that you have around the office.
Totally.
All right, and you achieve a lot through those quite a lot. But when everybody's only available through Skype or Teams or workplace chat, it's much more difficult to just have those short, brief conversations. So, and this comes back to the over communication point also, that you find yourself having to plan meetings and catch-ups quite regularly to what could possibly be just a short passing conversation in the office. it may turn into a 15-minute planned Skype session or something.
So I totally agree with you. And actually, one of the things is it's not about working the same but remotely. It's about finding a new way of working. And those conversations that you had at the coffee shop or whatever are part of how your business works organically and part about how you move things on. So we've looked at best practice of actually putting in maybe even like a 15-minute chat, if you like, in the morning. Doesn't necessarily have to have a big focus, but you could just check in, see how people are going, put some regular cadence around it so that people know, not to be walking the dog or do those other things, which I think are absolutely fine to do, right? But you've got to have that schedule in there to replicate some of that. And I think it's easier to do in a team. The challenge is when the medical team talk to the sales team or talk to the comms team and they happen to meet in the cafe. They may not have set up a meeting for it, but something really valuable came out of it because those people came together. Yeah. And those are difficult to regularly set up through those planned meetings. So we've got to find better ways to facilitate that somehow.
I mean, this is hugely important, and this is something I think all of us are dealing with, whether or not we've had good plans in place for a long time or whether they're new and evolving, is best practices from working from home. I know every freelancer out there right now is laughing smugly because they've been doing this for a long time and they're watching us struggle trying to understand how can we work from home and still be productive. So let me tell you some of the feedback I've heard. It's hard to know when to shut off. Yeah. I miss people. Really, I don't know if I should be working more just to prove that I'm working. And this is not just from you, I just anecdotally through my business network. How do I know if my team is working? So these are kind of 4 of the points that I've heard. But let's talk, from Robert Walters and GSK perspective, or from your personal perspectives as well, certainly just as valuable. What are some of those best practices that we should be thinking of and we should be communicating to our teams to help them work better? And I think your point is, Jonathan, is so important. It's not about replicating our exact same work at home in the exact same way. It's thinking different.
It's finding a new world, a new way of working potentially.
Yeah. So how are you engaging with people on these points?
Yeah, it's a good point that you mentioned there, John. But at the same time, I think there is also something to maintaining some of that core of how you operate and function as well. So for example, some of the best practices that we're initiating at the moment is we start every morning, every team with the 8:45 team meeting, and that continues every single day.
With morning calisthenics or no calisthenics?
Not yet. That's the next step maybe.
Okay, good.
But it is a morning team review session, and we just do that by Skype now. The other best practice that we've implemented is that by default, all calls will be video calls. So that just ensures there's more face-to-face interaction and more engagement. And I think there's
ensures people get dressed too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's one of the other important best practices too. That it might be remote working, but it's business as usual. Absolutely. And you go through the same process and you insist on the same standards that you would in the office.
Mm. Yeah. And I strongly agree with Jeremy. It's those core things that make your business tick, those regular update meetings, etc. Keep them going, keep that same routine. And then what else do you put around it? So personally, I think as simple as it might sound, the getting up and getting dressed at the same time, right? So for example, I walk to work. So I try and, if I'm working at home, I still do that walk. And I'm not actually walking to work, but I try and keep that routine. So I get up, I do that walk, that's when I do my mental preparation actually, whether I'm going to the office or whether I'm going to work from home. Mm-hmm. Keep that going, keep having those same connection points. For my role anyway, I'm running a region and I report to somebody in America. So I'm already in a bit of a work from home scenario. But one of the things I learned from that is never expect someone to contact you. Yeah. So that was it took a long time for me to embody that. But be the first to reach out, set up that Skype meeting, have that chat, do those kind of things. I think it's really important to keep that going and keep those connection points going.
Oh, I mean, I just want to pause here. I've always got a million questions for these gentlemen. It's such a fascinating topic, but please do feel free to send questions in. We will take a look and try and answer as many of them as possible. So I think this is really fascinating because I think for a long time, Japan, from a government perspective, certainly EY in Japan, has focused on the future of work and what does that look like. A lot of that has been theoretical. Some of it has been put into place already, regardless of COVID-19. And I think we've got this real chance to address the future of work. BCCJ, we consider the future of work exceedingly important. But also, I think, helping people find ways to be productive in ways that they might not have thought. And also from leadership side, evaluating that. So can you talk a little bit about maybe not general people teaching them how to work from home, but how are you coaching managers to coach their teams? And what are you asking them to look for, perhaps?
Yeah, so it sounds simple, but it's not. But it's about measuring for output.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds really, really easy, but this is a journey. It's not, and particularly in Japan, actually, it's a journey. I remember in the UK 20 years ago when we started working from home, and no one wanted to work from home. We had these conversations then, and we're having them in Japan now. Yeah. And I think it's really, really tough to do. I think managers have to be much clearer about the output they're expecting. And quite often, to be realistic, they don't know at the beginning. And I think we can be honest about that. But obviously, sometimes it's a bit scary to say, actually, I don't know what I'm looking for. But you have to co-create on what the output you're going to measure by and how you're going to support people through that process and get people comfortable with, your requirement isn't your presence. Your requirement is your delivery. And I think that's going to take ages.
It is. I don't think there's one right answer for every company. There's not one right answer, and certainly job functions
absolutely
require different kinds of output.
But I think this is an accelerator because actually a lot of the challenges that might be a barrier to not trying it get swept out of the way. Like you described, right? Having to come up with that in a week, right? And it's great because actually a lot of those challenges aren't real. And so by trying it, you've broken through a lot of them, hopefully.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The perceived challenges for sure. Yeah. And I'll add to that too. It's similar within our business. I mean, the main thing that managers are having to, develop and lead on is output. In recruitment business, obviously, some of that is fairly obvious too. And I think the majority of our organization in Japan is sales. So it's quite easy to measure the output of sales compared to some of the back office functions. But it's also management adapting to that. When you're not seeing somebody next to you all day and seeing what their output is and having to look at it through reports and things like that. But the other important point is just regular contact. I think that the managers are having daily contact with each of their members multiple times too. I've also heard of some teams in our office that are actually leaving Skype open for the whole day. So they'll try to keep an open sort of, meeting room where they all are speaking openly, and it's just like they're going about their day, but the Skype line is open, so if they have a question or they want to say something to the team, they can do so, and that also comes back to the interaction. But the other, I think, challenge for leadership too is especially around the newer people who need training and development. It's one thing if somebody's been in the business and very experienced, but we've got people, and I'm sure most companies do, where there's people in the business that have been there for a month. They're still learning the job, and so now also adapting to Skype and remote training are also challenges.
And I imagine with April coming, with so many new starters in Japan, it's probably on the mind of a lot of companies.
Of course.
Yeah. I mean, we found as well, we've got multiple technological platforms that we can use to interact. And I found different teams use different things. Some of my teams really prefer Line. Some of them prefer WhatsApp groups. Some of them prefer, our Skype for Business, our Microsoft Teams. Like we've got a variety of things. And I think one of the things we've done really well is not mandate that you have to do everything exactly the same way. But really giving people the flexibility of understanding that I think this is a journey.
I totally agree with you. And actually, one of the things we've done very early on when this has happened in lots of countries is run some refresher training. Because we all share, when you've got certainly a large population, you shouldn't assume that everyone's at the same level. So there are some that are very comfortable with many of them. And these are not new tools, any of them, except for Teams. But we've run just 1 hour sessions, drop-in sessions, We've made it available to all our staff. We run them every day at 9 a.m. So people can come 6 times if they want or whatever, so that they are comfortable with at least some of those technology platforms and are adept at using them.
That is an excellent point, because I think certain people have been using these for a longer period of time. It's very easy, but you do want to make sure everybody's on the same
at least
playing field there. Yeah,
exactly.
We've got some really interesting questions actually from the audience. So I'm going to take these out. There's out of order, but there's some really, really cool ones here.
The more interesting and cool they sound, the more nervous the chair. But I'm ready to say that's definitely a Robert Waters question.
That's a question for Jonathan.
Yes. So that's our default. So you'll know if Jonathan is deflecting, if it goes straight to Robert Waters, and vice versa, I believe. But here's a really interesting question. If you put together a remote working playbook for your teams, what would be your top 2 tips?
So that is a really good question.
It's a great question. Yes, thank you for whoever asked that question.
So we have put together a remote working playbook.
Did you indeed?
Actually, I kind of phased it into 3 sections. So what you should do before it happens. So about preparedness, what you should do during it, and what you should do after. So I think the top tip is probably prepare. Right? So be comfortable with technology. Particularly technology is going to be the answer to a lot of the challenges. So I think be ready, have a plan, and then once you're ready to activate it, I think, as we said before, make sure everyone gets to that basic level, and try and, I think Jeremy's point earlier, keep some of those key points of how you run your business on a regular schedule in place, so you've got some familiarity there.
Yeah.
Right. I think maybe a couple of key points I would make there is, before you start any plan for remote working, you need to make sure you're technologically enabled. I think that's number one, and we've been very, very fortunate in that sense, and that, we have been able to operate quite seamlessly. But I also understand about 85% of companies in Japan aren't actually set up for remote working or have limited capability. So if you're going to make a playbook, first you have to make sure that you've got the technology to do so. And the second point I would probably say is just really have some clear objectives of what you want to achieve from that. And for me, I think there's 3 core objectives that I set out, and the first one of those was ensuring that we provided seamless, clients and candidate experience, and that they didn't recognise we weren't even working from home. Secondly, is to maintain same levels of business output, and third, to maintain the same levels of internal and external communication.
I think those are all really fascinating, and I think things that are definitely needed. Excellent practices. You should all be taking notes. But it does lead to another question. So we're talking about technology enabling us to work from anywhere. So my firm, big audit firm, for example, data security, data privacy, and for both of your roles in your companies, you're privy to very sensitive information. Is technology the straight answer to data security? Is there special guidance that goes to your teams and best practices that help ensure that sensitive data remains sensitive?
For us, I can say we do have very strict security in place, and whilst we're fully mobile, of course, all of our devices and technology we use has full biometric security. We do have training in place as well, so we have legal and compliance and data security training that all employees need to go through annually. So we try to take every possible measure that we can. Of course, regardless of security, if somebody wants to be malicious, then it's difficult to protect against that. But I definitely think there's a reasonable level of protection there.
Actually, from our perspective, and again, this is preparation work that goes back years. Everything that we have has an extreme high level of data security around it. Actually, obviously, and it actually makes no difference whether you're in our office or at home. Most of it's cloud hosted. Most of it's extremely secure. You're using our devices. So it doesn't actually, that's a problem that technology solved, I'd say, in the last 3 or 5 years, depending on how your company's implemented it. It used to be a much bigger challenge than it is now.
Oh, certainly.
It was a big problem, but I think probably within the last 3 or 5 years, we tend to work in a way where those problems are solved permanently rather
Yes.
than depending on your location of work.
Yeah,
But
so
there
and
are-
if you've lost a device, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've lost client data if you're appropriately
so.
taking care of the data.
Exactly.
As Jeremy said, you can never safeguard against everything.
Right.
It's, yeah.
Right. And every time we hit a road bump, that's another learning opportunity for us to get better and figure out what we need to prepare for. There's a really interesting question. I'm sure it goes straight to Jonathan's beautiful point about admitting sometimes when you're not quite sure from a leadership perspective. And the question is essentially that it's very important, particularly in uncertain times, to give your people the confidence.
Absolutely.
So if you were admitting that you're not quite sure which way to go forward, is that the right thing? How do you manage that? If you're saying essentially we don't know what to do, are you going to lose the confidence of your teams by admitting that maybe you don't know the exact right way forward?
It depends.
It's challenging. Yeah, it's another excellent question. Thank you very much. It's a challenging question.
And it comes down to personal opinion, I think, but it is a time to lead with agility, to give some. You have to give some confidence in your leadership, but you've also got to have some humility as part of that. No one expects that we're computers that know everything. I think, and people.
Jonathan, I'm terribly disappointed. I thought you did.
And people know we're dealing with difficult situations. I think it's about how you say you don't know. Mm. And I always believe that, particularly when you have a large organization, there are a large number of brains out there, and someone's going to have a better idea than the 10 people that happen to be in the leadership room. And I don't think it's a failure to admit that from time to time.
Absolutely. And I think that really reminds me of a lot of, more recent ideas about what a leader is and the concept of leadership. And I think we see this with some of our political leaders right now in their varying responses.
Absolutely.
We won't take the BCCJ down that path, I promise. However, we do see some responses that seem very strong, but maybe are not necessarily built on anything, and others which seem different. So I think finding your own leadership style and maintaining that personal integrity has got to be exceedingly important.
Yeah, you've got to give your team confidence. They're going to look to you for some leadership and for certainty, but it doesn't mean you have to have the answer to everything. But at least pick things up and deal with them.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy, you must have had to deal with this as well, because you went from like a bit of infrastructure, not very much, to a full-blown plan in a short period of time. How did you give people the confidence, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, sure. And I guess to Jonathan's point before, I don't think that I ever said, or we should ever say that we don't know what to do. We don't know what the situation is going to, how it's going to evolve, and we don't know what the future holds. But we do know what steps we can take as a business. And again, you mentioned about being agile, and I think we've had to be extremely agile over the last few weeks. And we've make a decision and make a very decisive decision. But at the same time, be prepared that if that turns out, if the situation changes, then we may need to change that decision or take a further decision upon that. So you might not know what the situation brings, but just having decisiveness in your leadership, in decisiveness or kind of confidence in the way you communicate that to the business too. I mean, none of us knows which way it's going to go, but we're trying to ensure that we're communicating to the business that we're looking out for everybody in the business. We're looking at the number one to our employees is their safety and welfare. And I think they're the key messages that everybody needs to understand, that any decision we're making, first and foremost, is for their safety and welfare.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's hugely important. It's hugely important. There's a great question. It was one of the first ones that came in, actually, and I wanted to time this properly because we're talking about where we are currently, and we'll talk about kind of what the future may hold. So you dust off your crystal balls, please, soon. But what I'm very interested in, and I'm a very positive person, so I've been trying to focus on what are the silver lining points to everything happening right now. Certainly none of us would have planned this to happen. I think, all cherry blossom viewing parties are a little precariously placed at this point. None of us want this to happen, but there are some positives that are happening because of this, and these potential changes.
Yeah.
Are these changes that are in place now fundamental changes, or when the crisis has passed and NHK or someone announces that the crisis has passed and we can go back, is everything going to be business as usual? Or has COVID-19 fundamentally changed the way we're doing business?
A little bit of both, I think. There's definitely going to be some changes that do come out of this, and how we operate as a company, I'm sure how many companies operate. There will be some drastic changes and also some subtle changes for sure. I can confidently say we're not going to go back when it all settles to a full remote work, smart working environment, but we will be taking some of the lessons that we've learned through this to adopt to hopefully more flexible working scenarios moving forward. So other silver lining points, I guess, is learning how to communicate as an organization when you're not seeing people face to face. And maybe Jonathan's experienced the same, but trying to communicate with the whole organization when you would have previously done a town hall, got everyone together in one room, that sort of thing may change for a long time. I'm not sure if it will go back or not, but so learning how to communicate and get a message across the whole business, and all of these are sort of takeaways and learnings that silver linings from all of this.
I sincerely hope that we do make some adjustments to our way of working as a result of some of the lessons we've learnt in this. I am wary that what often happens at the end of the crisis, you rush back to normal working, forget that. There'll be another crisis that comes on, nowhere of this scale, but it will be, how do we make the numbers for this year? How do we get the business back on track? That will become the new crisis. And therefore, it's very easy to forget some of what we've learned. Right. I really hope that some of the times where we broke through those discussions that we talked about earlier, and we learned that some of this does work, enable us to do a product launch remotely, use digital more, do a VTC instead of having a load of people fly in. Meetings I found now tend to be much shorter and more focused than when everyone's in a room.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yes. And actually doing it remotely didn't need to enable that change, it did. Yeah. So I do really hope that we pick up a few of these lessons, and I'd encourage all leaders to think of maybe 3 or 5 positives that they want to embed on a long-term basis, and just keep those in mind now so that it doesn't get forgotten.
Right.
I've read a couple of papers on dealing with crisis, and those organizations that can start to plan for the future during the crisis are those which do the best after it.
Oh, I think that's so hugely important. I mean, I'm from a sustainability background, and less flying, less like taking, your cars, your trains, your automobiles, whatever, for meetings that could be done on a VTR. Certainly nothing replaces the face-to-face. We're delighted that you as an audience has been able to come in and log in, and I'm much happier to have you physically here than worry about the technological, probably my weak technological abilities to make sure that would go very smoothly. But
also think about the time, if I don't know how many people are online, but if you'd come here, you joined us, yes, it would have been a slightly different experience, but then you travel back, and that's maybe, let's say everyone takes half an hour in each direction, that's an hour everyone attending has got to do something else. And hopefully maybe even spend some of it with their family, or doing a leisure activity, or improve our quality of life generally.
Oh, I think that's such a great point we hadn't even touched on. Commuting time, and a lot of our colleagues commute very, very far. They are living out in Chiba or further areas, and they get this whole other time back in their lives, which is exciting. I have to admit, I'm probably far more productive working from home, but again, there's pluses and minuses, because yes, output can be higher, but you do miss those serendipitous moments in the office, and the camaraderie of going through something together and working together on projects. So there are quite a few other great questions. I'm going to ask probably one more before we wrap up, and the time has gone much quicker than I was hoping. So many great questions to choose from. I think this is the one I'll choose, and forgive me, I'd love to get to all of your questions, but how do you manage the uncertainty when we don't really know I think we could hope to say where we are in the cycle based on what we've seen out of mainland China, Hong Kong, and Korea. Singapore and Taiwan stand out as well, I think. how do we manage that uncertainty from a business perspective and with your staff? And what's going to trigger, what are the triggers you're going to wait for before you can say, okay, now business as usual, or maybe the new business as usual? And it's a tough question. We'll give that to Jeremy first.
So in terms of sort of returning back to normal, all those triggers, for us as a business, there's a few key things that we're looking at to indicate where we go from here. I think the government is something we'll monitor and keep an eye on the guidance that the government provides. That was what forced us to make the decision in the first place, but it's not something that we're going to base all decisions around. Other things is probably around the number of cases that continue to arise in Japan, and when we start to see a decline in the number of cases day by day. I think that's another important point, as well as the schools. The schools returning is another important one. But yeah, where do we go from here? It's difficult to say in terms of planning for the uncertainty in the future. I think for us as a business, the decisions we make are really based on where we're at today and where we're going to be tomorrow. Where we'll be in 3 months' time is difficult to know. Thankfully, as a business, we're very agile. So again, our business is mostly a sales organisation, so we can pivot and make changes where necessary. So we'll continue to make the decisions based on the situation unfolding every single day.
Yeah. Jonathan, how about for
I would say
you?
it's actually very similar to Jeremy. I mean, we're still in the early stages of this. I'm imagining this is months, not weeks. We've seen different cycle lengths particularly we've seen what's happened in China, Hong Kong, Korea. We're still in a relatively early stage, and most of Europe and North America is even earlier. So this is going to be a period of uncertainty for months, not weeks. And we'll continue to monitor the situation, the number of cases and the government advices across the geography and make decisions based on that. As a leader, how can you deal with that uncertainty? And particularly when I think about communicating with our teams, it has to be just with honesty and openness, to be quite honest. All of our teams are reading the newspapers and seeing the memes and what everyone's putting on Facebook as well.
Yeah, there's some particularly clever memes out there.
Very much so.
We have some people with some fantastic senses of humor,
Absolutely.
I think, which is certainly not to make light of the situation, but definitely nice to have a little bit of levity here and there. We're unfortunately about 3 minutes from the end of our session. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your honesty, for your candor, for sharing your journeys, your stories with the BCCJ membership and audience. And we very much appreciate hearing it. And as we can hear, I think some of the real key takeaways is that this is a journey, and we're all learning as we go along. I think that clear communication with both our teams, from leadership, amongst leadership, and throughout, I think is exceedingly important. And we have a great opportunity here to really build stronger businesses, more resilient businesses. And I personally hope that some of the good lessons that we've learned through this crisis actually will help us in the future and going forward to build even stronger times when we have good things to be working from home for example, the Olympics and exciting things as opposed to pandemic. So again, gentlemen, thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you.
The best of luck with your plans. I'm so sorry to the audience if I didn't get to all of the questions. Thank you for your time and consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.